We know the story of ancient China, a civilization of profound philosophy, of Confucian harmony and breathtaking artistic achievement. It was the Middle Kingdom, a realm of order and balance where the mandate of heaven guided enlightened rulers. We marvel at the poetry of Li Bai, the wisdom of Sun Tzu, the serene beauty of a landscape painting. This is the China celebrated in history books, a culture that valued filial piety, bureaucracy, and celestial order above all else. But order, when absolute, has a dark and bloody shadow. For every scroll of elegant poetry, there was a legal code written in terror. For every harmonious principle of Confucianism, there was a brutal reality of legalist philosophy, which believed that only through overwhelming fear and ruthless punishment could a society be controlled. This is not a story of random cruelty. This is the story of how one of the world's most advanced civilizations engineered a system of state-sanctioned terror so psychologically devastating, so physically grotesque, that its echoes would shape a nation's psyche for millennia. Welcome to the dark heart of the Middle Kingdom. To understand the horror, we must first dismiss the myth of the purely benevolent emperor. While Confucianism preached virtue, the machinery of the state, particularly during the Qin and early Han dynasties, was powered by legalism. The foundational legalist text, the Book of Lord Shang, states it plainly. A punishment should be severe enough to prevent the crime. But this was not simple deterrence. This was the belief that humanity was inherently selfish and could only be directed through a system of collective responsibility and punishment so terrifying that the very thought of transgression would become unthinkable. Our journey into this world of calculated terror begins with the most infamous legal code, the 5 punishments. This was not a random list of tortures, but a graduated, systematic ladder of bodily destruction, designed to publicly mark the criminal and render their social status permanently visible. The first step was Mo facial tattoo, a permanent brand of shame that told the world this person had betrayed the social order. But this was merely the prelude. The next step was Yi, the cutting off of the nose. This was more than pain. It was a deliberate disfigurement, a public removal of one's humanity, making the victim a walking, horrifying spectacle. The punishments escalated with chilling logic. Here, the amputation of 1 or both feet at the ankle. Archaeological evidence from mass graves shows skeletons with precisely cleaved tibias and fibulas, confirming the clinical efficiency of this practice. A person who lost their feet could no longer work the land, serve in the army, or even walk with dignity. They were transformed into a living burden. Then came gong, castration for men or confinement for women. This was the state's ultimate control over the body, not just as a vehicle for pain, but as a source of lineage and future. It was the systematic destruction of a person's legacy. The final brutal climax was Da Pi, death by slicing or slow excision. This was the ultimate spectacle of power, where the criminal's body was publicly carved apart over hours. It's a gruesome theater, demonstrating that the state could dismantle a human being piece by piece. But the true genius and horror of this system was its bureaucratic, administrative nature, which transformed arbitrary violence into a predictable, inescapable machine. The terracotta army of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, stands as a timeless testament to his power and obsession with order. But his most enduring and chilling legacy was not in clay warriors, but in the codification of terror. The Qin dynasty did not invent harsh punishments, but it perfected their administration. Recently deciphered bamboo slips from a Qin official's tomb at Shuihudi have provided a stunningly detailed window into this world. These are not grand imperial decrees, but mundane administrative manuals that detail legal statutes with chilling bureaucratic precision. They outline not only the crimes, from theft and desertion to improper form of address, but the exact specifications for punishment, the type of bamboo cane or whip to be used, the precise number of strokes mandated for each offense, the required intervals between blows to maximize pain and minimize premature death, and even the specific bureaucratic form to be filled out afterward to report the punishment had been carried out to the letter. This was a system where a minor official could consult a scroll to determine the state-sanctioned suffering for a misplaced bale of hay. This was not the impulsive rage of a madman. It was the cold, efficient, and soulless operation of a state machine that treated human agony as a matter of standard administrative procedure, as routine as recording grain taxes. This system of codified terror reached its most devastating and psychologically ingenious apotheosis in the practice of yizhuo, or collective responsibility. This was the legalist principle that if one person committed a crime, their entire family, 3 generations including parents, siblings, children, and sometimes their entire village or 5-family unit, could be executed, enslaved, or mutilated alongside them. The historical text records of the Grand Historian by Sima Qian, who himself suffered castration for defending a disgraced general, recounts the fate of General Li Ling. After his defeat and capture by the Xiongnu, the Emperor Wu of Han did not merely execute Li Ling, he ordered the systematic extermination of his entire clan. This policy deliberately weaponized the most fundamental and sacred Confucian value, filial piety and family loyalty, and twisted it into the state's most powerful tool of control. The fear was no longer just for one's own life, but the paralyzing terror of being the cause of utter annihilation for your own parents, your innocent children, and your siblings. This turned every family member into an enforcer of state orthodoxy, creating a web of mutual surveillance that made dissent almost unthinkable. It was a psychological prison, built from the bricks of familial love and fear, that proved far more effective and inescapable than any physical wall. Perhaps the most psychologically and spiritually devastating punishment, reserved for the highest-ranking officials for crimes like treason, was the death of 1,000 cuts, or lingqi. This was far more than an execution. It was a meticulously choreographed and symbolically laden ritual of deconstruction, designed to deliver a message that resonated through the very cosmology of Chinese culture. The condemned was paraded through the streets and tied to a frame in a public square, transforming their death into a state-sponsored spectacle. The executioner, a specialist who trained in this specific and gruesome art, would then methodically remove limbs and flesh in a specific prescribed order, often starting with non-lethal areas to prolong life and consciousness for as long as possible. The goal was multifaceted: to inflict maximum pain, to publicly humiliate the victim by reducing them to a screaming, dismembered object, and most profoundly, to utterly annihilate their physical form. In a culture with deep-seated beliefs in ancestor worship, where an intact body was considered essential for a peaceful afterlife, lingqi was the ultimate damnation. By leaving no whole body to bury, the state was not just ending a life, it was obliterating the individual's soul and severing their connection to their ancestors for all eternity. It was the absolute final assertion of state power over an individual's body, their mortal existence, and their eternal fate. The legacy of this systematic terror is profound and deeply woven into the fabric of Chinese history, creating a cultural and political DNA where obedience was not just a virtue, but a hardwired survival instinct. It established a paradigm where the individual was utterly subordinate to the collective will of the state, a concept that the legalist philosophers championed as the only path to stability. This legalist foundation, though later softened and masked by the more humane rhetoric of Confucian ideals, never truly disappeared from the mechanics of Chinese governance. It established a blueprint for centralized, authoritarian control, a playbook for using bureaucratic efficiency to manage human suffering that would influence every subsequent dynasty, from the Tang to the Qing. The majestic Great Wall, a symbol of ingenuity and national defense, was also built by countless convicts and corvée laborers toiling under the imminent threat of these very punishments. The beautiful, timeless poetry of the Tang dynasty was often written by scholars and bureaucrats who lived in constant, low-grade fear of offending the emperor or a rival faction and facing not just their own death, but the extermination of their clan. The story of ancient China is a tale of two powerful, intertwined forces: the sublime, philosophical pursuit of heavenly harmony and the brutal, pragmatic engine required to enforce a terrestrial version of that order. The unspeakable punishments were not an irrational aberration. They were the dark, calculated, and terrifyingly logical cost of that imposed harmony. They stand as a chilling testament that behind the most magnificent and enduring civilizations often lies a foundation not just of stone and lofty philosophy, but of calculated, institutionalized, and meticulously administered terror, a permanent reminder of the price absolute power extracts from the human spirit.